see people are still coming in, but I want to go ahead and tell good morning to everyone and welcome to our May 2025 edition of Leadership Live. This month we are once again being hosted by Dr. Karen Mishra, and it's an honor to have her here once again. As you all know, if you'd like to move a slide up, Karen, we like to start each meeting with our why, which is to multiply the blessings and opportunities that have been placed into our trusts. And moving forward again, you'll see our schedule here of the upcoming Leadership Live year. We are still currently in the middle of quarter 2. Last month, as I said earlier, we heard from Dr. Mishra talk about trust building in teams, and this month we'll hear from her once again regarding coaching and mentorship. And for those of you at Rosewood, if there's a session earlier in the year that you missed, you can always go to our YouTube channel, watch it there, answer the question at the end, and just send that answer to marketing, and we will mark you down for watching that. So yeah, like I said, we are moving forward again with Dr. Mishra, who will be covering coaching and mentorship. So without further ado, Dr. Mishra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, so today I want to talk about coaching and mentoring and think of it from both aspects. Maybe you're a coach or mentor, or maybe you're looking for a coach or mentor. So one of the reasons I love this is that I've got certification from Gallup to be a strengths coach. And so I could talk about that all day long. So I will try not to do that. But I wanted to at least introduce you to a couple tools that I use in my MBA class on this topic. Is the Clifton Strengths, which is a coaching tool. And then I found this really great book called Protege Power. It's all about mentoring, finding a mentor, being a mentor, looking for a mentor, from a woman who actually ran a mentoring program at a large company. So I just want to first start off, I kind of use those terms sometimes interchangeably, but there are a few little twists on what they are. So if you've ever had a mentor, or if you've been a mentor, that's usually somebody that we look to for advice. We think of them as maybe somebody who has a lot of experience and wisdom from that experience that they're willing to share with us. It could be even somebody who we look up to as a role model. Coaching is a little different. Sometimes there's some overlaps, but it's not really advice driven or directive, but it's more kind of supportive. So it's more of like, what are you thinking? How could you end up doing this? How can I help you? So sometimes there can be some overlaps, but coaching is definitely more supportive, and mentoring can sometimes be more directive and advice giving. So I looked up some stats to just see, like, are people, how is mentoring used in business? And so it looks like 84% of Fortune 500 companies have mentoring program, and 100% of the Fortune 50, which I thought was really interesting. And the woman who wrote this book was one of those Fortune 500. Many employees see the importance of mentorship. They're, interested in having a mentor, looking for a mentor. And they all agree that they're very valuable. But even though there's this interest in it, only 37% of people have a mentor. So to me, that looks like this huge opportunity for us as professionals to find that mentor or be that mentor for somebody else. Women have never, there's 63% of women have never had a mentor. But one interesting thing that we've actually found in our peer mentor program too is that 89% of those who have been mentored go on to mentor others. So you all know about our peer mentor program we have that you support. And we do have a lot of students who go through that and then say, oh, I want to be that mentor for somebody else too. So that's one of those positive experiences. So, COVID hits everything, right? So mentoring initiatives have gone down a little bit. And I'm going to talk about one other approach, which you can do to be a peer coach, a peer mentor with each other. And then I'd love to hear your opinion about reverse mentoring, because that's something that new that a lot of organizations are doing, because, there's lots of things. In fact, my 27-year-old son last night said, "Mom, for your age, you're actually pretty tech savvy." So I thought that's an example of how sometimes, peer mentoring can go the other way with reverse mentoring. So the other thing is that it really can affect people's career development. So people who go through coaching and mentoring, they end up getting a promotion. And even it's not just the mentees who get that, but the mentors themselves too. So it can be very valuable, empowering kind of experience. So there's two different kinds of mentoring that we'll talk about. One is very formal, so like if an organization connects people, or like our peer mentor program where we connect freshmen with upperclassmen. But a lot of times, some of the best mentoring you can get can be very informal too, with people that you just meet or you bump into, or maybe you just have one cup of coffee with them, and that's a very profound kind of a conversation. So two different types. But the things that people look for in a mentor are, usually we're looking for somebody who, we look up to, they're admirable or they're interesting, they have a job that we think we'd like to learn more about. But a couple of the things that Lori Craver, who wrote that book, emphasizes a little bit more is making sure you know somebody who's accessible, because it's not good enough to just say, oh, I'd like this, that person looks like they'd be a perfect mentor for me. But if you don't have access to them, then that's kind of, a lost cause. But also in your organization, someone who can identify the barriers and limits that you're struggling with yourself, which to me is kind of an interesting way to think about them, because sometimes we do bump into things we don't necessarily know why. And a mentor can help us identify what those are and say, let's look for some strategies to do that. So industry knowledge, of course, is helpful. But the four different things that she talks about are clarity, which I think is helpful. You want somebody who's not going to beat around the bush, who's going to be honest with you. So that comes with boldness, but and honesty, but also heart. So somebody who really cares about that. So for those of you who've been a mentor or you're looking for one, what else would you add to that list of things that you would want in a mentor? Anybody have any thoughts?
I would say transparency.
That's
Someone
good.
who can just give us how it is, real I guess good feedback, and not sugarcoat it in a sense of trying to be a yes man, I guess is what they call it.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, because we're not going to really be able to improve or maybe move in a direction we want if somebody's not going to be transparent with us in that way. And even it could be transparent in the terms of saying, hey, this is an obstacle I had and this is how I overcame it. Even that kind of transparency, I think, could be really helpful too. Yeah, that's great. Anybody else?
We've got some chat
Okay.
answers. So we've
Yeah,
got Kelly Beard, who said wisdom and life experience.
great.
David Wozniak echoed experience. Nick Lay said a mentor will challenge you to look at opportunities from a different perspective. And then Dr. Fubara came in and said someone who has a similar background as you. And I'd like to echo that and say just a mentor should be someone who understands who you are as a person.
Yes, that's really great too. Yeah, we're going to talk about how we can, some preparation that we can do to help that, because you might meet somebody, they're willing to mentor you, but yes, you're right, Jay. It's a lot deeper if they actually know a little bit about you, what motivates you. And so, yeah, that's some of the things that we can do to prepare to being a good mentee, is know the things that have shaped us in our life, know our strengths, know the direction that we want to go. And so one thing that you can do is, bring this self-knowledge in your career aims to somebody, so they can, that really helps them say, hey, maybe here's somebody you should talk to, or here's a certification you should get, or, here's some things you want to think about. But there's lots of tools out there. And I know that you all probably have done DISC. Myers-Briggs is another one, or we call it MBTI sometimes. Um, the Enneagram, a lot of my students really love the Enneagram. And then another one that my mentors at Michigan, University of Michigan, created is called the Reflective Best Self. And that's where you go and ask It sounds like a lot, so sometimes I do the mini version, but the way they do it is you go ask 20 people you know, when have you seen me at my best? And then you synthesize all of those different responses and you come up with a lot of things that people see that mimic your strengths too. So lots of different ways to get to that self-knowledge. Um, but well, let's just stop for a sec. Does anybody have anything to add to those tools? So strengths that I talked about first, MBTI disc, reflected best self, or Enneagram. Does anybody have any others you think they're really useful?
Use Working Genius, you can use Culture Index, Index, Colby. There's quite a few out there.
I missed the first thing that you said.
Working Genius, done by
Working
Patrick
Genius.
Lencioni in the Table Group.
Oh,
And
right.
you've got
Yeah.
Culture Index, you've got Performance Index. There's a new one out there now called Prism. There's also the Colby is really big, especially if you're working with EOS. They tend to want to use the Colby assessment as part of that. So there's no shortage of assessments out there if you're really trying to discover self-awareness.
That is very true. That's very true. And I know sometimes they can cost money, but there is also this website that's called Truity that has kind of like free versions, mini versions of some of these that can be a very helpful place to just start if you want to think about yourself. One of the other things that I use a lot of times with executives is to have them brainstorm what's not on their resume. That really kind of adds to that who am I portion, because a lot of times there's things that we've experienced that have happened in our life that actually shape who we are and maybe shape our direction that we want to go in our life. But we don't necessarily write them on our resume or our LinkedIn profile. So think about yourself for a minute. I'll just share a few of mine, and these literally are, I'm the oldest of four, and I actually got my fourth my youngest brother when I was 11 because my cousin had passed away, and so we adopted her son. I was a co-op student. Now that's on my resume, but what I don't say about it is that that's how I paid for college because I was able to be a co-op student. So to me, that's tells a little bit about my perseverance. I've served on several nonprofit boards, and even that is it can be there on your resume, but kind of the depth and the things that you've learned about founding a board. I've founded a nonprofit board and also raised money for several. I had cancer a couple years ago and then lost my spouse. And so those two last things created resilience in me. They're not necessarily things that we put on a resume. So anybody else, what do you think about this idea of kind of brainstorming what's not on your resume, but that has shaped you to be who you are? Helpful, not helpful? Are these things that you'd be able to bring up with a mentor or that you think a mentor should know?
I think it's helpful, Dr. Mishra. I think it speaks to your character and who you are as a person. You want the mentor to know you well-rounded, not just from a professional aspect.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because lots of different things impact who we are in our life. And yeah, we don't,
Exactly.
even though it sometimes feels like we might live at work 24/7, we actually do go home and do other things too.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it speaks to what drives you, and maybe your mentor picks up some things that you're passionate about, and they can use that in the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Thank you.
I think Dr. Mishra, I think it blends, right? You mentioned earlier about the difference between, or the sort of overlap between coaching and mentoring, because many of these things, if you discover the things, especially or things that are holding you back, then a coach would recommend a therapist, because in reality you've got to overcome some of those previous traumas in order to move forward to where you really want to go. Don't know if a mentor would have that sort of insight, but
Yeah.
it would be important for them to understand that there could be other non-work related things that
That's
could
true.
be impacting your ability to perform your day-to-day and then future functions.
Yeah, that's a great point. And full transparency, I have seen a therapist a couple different times in my life because you know, it really helps you to kind of resolve some of those things and move you forward. So, but you're right, the mentor is not the therapist, but it's more of, hey, these are some things that have shaped me that, you know, are probably helpful for you to know about me. So, one of the other exercises I like to use is something called like, what's one word to describe who you are? So sometimes you can take all those different assessments and instruments that you've used, kind of look at yourself, narrow it down to a few different words, and then see if you can tie them all together. And how does that really describe kind of the way that you approach your job, the way that you approach life? And so this is an exercise I did with a group earlier this year, and these are some of the different things they came up with. I always try to say, you know, use a really bold or audacious kind of a word. So don't just say I'm responsible or disciplined, but what does that actually mean? Because sometimes that can really help you focus on like the direction that you want to go or the role that you want in an organization. So that's just one for you all to think about. So when we talk about finding a mentor, sometimes we think, oh, I'm just going to show up and the person's going to just, you know, pour all this stuff into me and I'm going to come out and I'm going to have this new direction and new drive. But the reality is, if we want a mentor, we have to actually do some preparation. So in addition to knowing ourselves, we need to set up the meeting ourselves, be accountable. Don't just rely on the mentor to do all the work because they're probably a very, very busy person. So make sure that we are responsible in that manner, that we've done all that self-knowledge ahead of time. And sometimes it actually includes informational interviews, the know before you go, because your mentor might say, hey, I want you to, if you think you want to go this direction, I want you to go interview 3 people and find out, is this really the right fit for you? And then the one that comes up a lot that I see that employers say they want employees to be is coachable. So how can you show that you're really the kind of person who is willing to accept feedback, is interested in getting that feedback? And so that shows that you are more coachable if you have those. So also respecting their time. So if they say, hey, I've got a half an hour, then just cut it off at the half an hour. You know, be respectful of their time, be honest with them. If somebody's going to give you their time and their help, we want to be honest. And if they say, hey, by the way, I'm going to share something with you confidentially about the organization, but you can't share this. Show that you can be trusted with that too. My son who works at EY has a mentor who's very high up in the organization. Sometimes he'll say, okay, just so you know, this is coming. It could impact you, but you cannot share this with anybody. And so far, my son, he's been very good about not sharing that. Just using good manners. So making sure you show up on time, that you're not just whining. And then being humble. So that gets to that feedback coaching aspect of it. So anybody have any other ideas of what we should do to be a good mentee?
I think it comes back to the follow-up, right? So if you've got advice from your mentor and there's a next step,
Yes.
always come back into the next session and what you did with that information so that you show that you're valuing their time, their insights, and trying to the best of your abilities to apply some of the things and advice that you're getting. Otherwise, the mentor could get a feeling that they're just pouring into you with no, and it's just going out the other end, right? You want to, they want to feel value through the interaction, through the relationship.
Yeah,
So
that is.
this is what I did since we talked last time. This is what I've done.
Yeah, I love that because it really does show that you respect them enough to actually follow through on what they ask you to do too. I think when mentors see that, they're more willing to continue that relationship on knowing the person has put value into. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
We have
Yeah.
3 in the chat. Callie
Okay.
Beard said, take their advice. Dr. Everbara said, listen. And Alex Anderson said, be vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, and I think, so I've done research on trust for 20 plus years. And the vulnerability aspect is really what kind of differentiates a trusting relationship from just any other kind of a relationship. Because, you know, sometimes it's hard to say, hey, I messed up on this assignment. I want to do better next time. What advice do you have for me? Not always easy to say, but when we can be vulnerable like that, yeah, we can get a lot of great insights. So that's great. Thank you. So one of the things, another exercise, so I have a few sprinkled in here just to help, is to think about your value. So it goes to that kind of one word, all of your skills and your abilities, but sometimes we're a little bit too humble, which, you know, humility is a good thing, but sometimes it's helpful for us to think about, like, why do people come to us and say, hey, we want you to work on this project with us, and we need you on this committee, or we need you to spearhead this initiative. And so probably they're doing that because they're already seeing things in you, your strengths and your talents and your abilities. This is an exercise that I like to use to kind of just delineate those a little bit more, because then it helps me also understand, this is what I'm bringing to the table. So any thoughts about this one? Would this be easy to do? I know it's hard sometimes because I've even had people say, oh, I don't want to talk about my strengths in an interview. It seems like I'm bragging. But sometimes we need to know who we are to be helpful in explaining ourselves to other people. Anybody want to try? Give us an example. Okay. Well, this is something you can take, think about it for yourself, because it also is very good in describing yourself to a mentor too. So I just wanted to touch on informational interviews. If you haven't done those before, I find they are so helpful, whether it's you use them to find a mentor, you use them based on what a mentor has asked you to do some research on maybe a particular role or an industry or an organization. And so it's not really, I mean, it's to network, but not to necessarily get a job. But in the process, you might be able to find a mentor. And so you use your existing network with people that you know. So it could be your alumni network, it could be people you know on LinkedIn, and just start asking them questions about who they are and what they do. And we get back to that respectful of their time thing. Just say, hey, I just need 15 minutes of your time, and then cut it off at 15. We used to go out for coffee all the time. I think a lot of us have reverted kind of to phone calls or Zoom calls, but if you can do coffee, that's always great to spend time with people and always thank them and always connect with them to make sure that you kind of keep that network going. So I've got a list of questions here that are helpful because some, people really do love talking about themselves and helping other people. And so you can ask them about their job. What is their day like? What advice do you have for me for classes or other experiences that I should try? So I just wanted to mention that as a way that can be very helpful, whether it's something you do yourself or whether a mentor says, hey, I want you to go explore this a little bit more. If you want to go in that direction, like go find somebody who has that job and ask them about it. Because sometimes jobs look different until we've actually talked to a person. So I guess I should ask, has anybody done informational interviews? And what do you think of those? Helpful, not helpful?
I think we sprinkle it when we do some interviews. And like Beth said earlier, you kind of get those informational questions in there so you can kind of get to know the person and get a feel of their if they're good, if they'll mesh well with the team, not just performance, because you can have all the skills and everything you have, all the degrees, but if you aren't going to mesh well with the team, you're not going to fit in the culture, then it kind of it's not going to be a good fit in the first place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, because there's probably a million people who can do the job, but you want to make sure that it fits in the culture that's already there. That's true.
The other thing I see a lot, Dr. Mishra, on the
yeah.
informational interviews is that
Yes.
I use that a technique where we're trying to help some folks find jobs a lot to get in
Oh,
front of people that aren't actively listening. So it's one of the few ways I know that you can get that meeting with a company you might be interested in working at, even if they don't have an open position. Because if you just send an application, they send you the form rejection letter, as where if you can find a contact with somebody that might know somebody there and just set up an informational meeting, and it might, I've seen it actually push people away from certain job industries, whatever. And I've also
oh,
seen it work where they might not have a role, but during 30 days later, things are changing pretty dynamically in the business, where they come back and they've had that informational interview and then they have a leg up actually getting that opportunity.
yeah. No, that is a really good point. One of my students from a long time ago when I taught at Wake Forest, she just, for some reason, she had in her head she wanted to work for Burt's Bees, and that was just like her sole focus. And they didn't have an opening, so she literally wrote them a letter, asked them to do informational interviews. And it took about 3 years, but she kept in contact with them through this process. And eventually they had a role and they hadn't even advertised it yet. And they called her first and they said, "We know that you really want to work here. Why don't you interview for this job?" And so, yeah, that can really work out, that kind of persistence. Yeah, thank you all. So thinking of us as a mentee, because I think we don't always think, do I need to be prepared in a certain way, or can I just show up and just, by osmosis, learn these things? But a lot of it is getting back to that idea of what do we do already for self-development? Are we the kind of person who is interested in learning new things all the time? I personally try to get, a new certification or two every year, just to learn new things and get different perspectives. And are you a person of integrity, so that they know that, they're pouring into somebody who is going to be appreciative of their time? So anything else you can think of um, as you're thinking of a mentor and how you can be prepared for that person? Okay, well, we'll think of some other things as we go along. So this comes from Lori's book about specific ways to find an ideal mentor. So, actively seeking people out who and asking them, "Hey, will you be my mentor?" Because sometimes you might meet with somebody once and they might not think much about it, but you might say, "Hey, this has been so valuable. Could we do this on an ongoing basis?" Sometimes we might find somebody and we think, "Oh, that is the job for me." That happened to me when I was working for General Motors as a co-op student. And right after I graduated, I said to my boss, "I really want your job in the future, not right now, but sometime in the future. So can you, give me some information on how to get there?" Sometime we might find somebody who we don't know, and then we can reach out to them either through our network, through other people, or just introduce ourselves to them and say, "Here's what I'm looking for. It seems like you would be perfect." Sometimes you can ask. Organizations are always happy to make matches with people. So there's lots of different ways to find a mentor if that's something you want. So one of the ways that I always encourage people is to think about who is already in what I've called trust network. So who is that person who's already in your network, whether they're people that you went to school with or people that you've worked with, or all those kinds of people can be very, very helpful. So that's just one other exercise to go through and think about, who would those people be? They could be friends, family, lots of different people. And then once you build up that network and keep track of it, make sure that you're always checking in with people, because I can't tell you how many students have come back to me, someplace I taught 10 years ago saying, "Hey, would you be a reference for me? Or would you help me with this issue?" And so it helps if I've talked to them, not just 10 years ago, but sometime in between the 10 years ago. So she has some really great things in this book. I'm just sharing a few with you about how to think through what it is that you're looking for in your mentor. Well, they do we have one suggestions she has is to have an elevator pitch for your professional goals, to find a mentor, to kind of like get it crystallized in 30 seconds, to say, here, this is what I'm looking for. This is why you'd be so helpful. Would you help me right now? So these are just some other ways to just kind of brainstorm who could be my mentor, what kinds of things could they bring to the table. And some other things to just think about when you're looking for this mentor or when you're being a mentor to somebody. So, don't offer if you're not accessible, but make sure that you can spend time with them and that you know their industry. I've seen some professionals get kind of stuck sometimes because they take somebody's word as gospel who doesn't know their industry well, and says, oh, you should do this or you should do this. And that's why I think somebody who knows kind of what you're doing, your organization, what you're interested to do in the future, that can be very helpful. Plus, I'm also a fan when you're asking people for advice to get multiple inputs so that you don't rely just on one person, but try to get lots of perspectives and balance those out. So she actually created a scorecard, which could be helpful for some people if you're trying to think, do I want somebody inside my organization or outside my organization? I've had mentors who I've served on nonprofit boards with because they had done it much longer or were at higher levels of their organization. And so they were good mentors to me as well. So it kind of helps you narrow it down if you're trying to decide, who would be the best mentor for me. So one of the other things we talked about was this idea of knowing what you want to do in the future. And I think sometimes we know, but sometimes we don't necessarily know the possibilities. But we can at least figure out, like, where am I today? Where do I think I'd like to be? And what's that gap? And then how can I take some steps? Okay, I lost one slide that I thought was there. What are my action steps that I have to take to get there? Because sometimes we just say, oh, I'd like this new job, or this, I'd like to do this instead, but we don't think maybe there's some things that we need to do to prepare ourselves, whether it's a class, a certification, a mentoring, or shadowing, something like that. So what do you all think are some of the best ways to get those action steps figured out for yourself? Has anybody done this? Do you have any advice for us?
Yeah, this area is what John Maxwell will call your growth plan. So you've taken time to identify sort of those three phases that you were talking about earlier, the gaps, and then the individual milestones you've got to meet in order to continue to progress along your path. And so the most important part, and you've already mentioned it, is you've got to write it down. If you think you're going to keep this in your head, and you've got to have something you can see, and something just like this with a smart, some measure to say, am I on path or am I behind? And if you don't have some metric of time associated with it, you'll just keep on putting it off, and you'll look at it and say, yeah, I need to do that. And a month later, yeah, I need to do that. You got to give yourself some deadlines and timelines in order to truly be effective.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Yeah, so sometimes we call them SMART goals, where you're thinking about, what my goal is, and can I put a time to it as well? And is it something that I can actually achieve? Yeah, I'm in a Christian leadership peer mentor group right now. And the woman who's leading it, I thought, oh, we're just going to show up and talk. She's like, no, here's our chart. Here's your SMART goals, where every time we meet, we're going to bring our goals. So I haven't been in a peer mentoring group like that before. It's that very, very action oriented, but I think it's very helpful, because then to your point about setting the time to it, like some of the things I thought, oh, I have all year to do, I've already been working on them and getting close to accomplishing them. So yeah, I think that's great. One of the other things, exercises that I found that really helps is thinking about what your strengths are, whether you're doing the Clifton strengths or the reflected best self, or DISC, or whichever way assessment that you use. Sometimes you can use those assessments to explain to people this is how I add value to my team, to my organization. And that way it doesn't feel like bragging. As I mentioned, some of my students feel like talking about what they're good at is bragging, but more of kind of factual, like I've noticed, you know, to that achiever strength, I don't stop until I finish my goal. So that kind of tells, that's one of my strengths. So that tells you why that she gives me a worksheet and I fill it out and I do it. So this can be another helpful way for you to figure out how to explain yourself. Another way to kind of look at when you're thinking about your potential mentors, look at them from what kind, once you've identified, narrowed them down, then you can say, okay, what kind of traits do they have that are going to be valuable for me? Where can I find them? Is it inside my organization, outside? And is there anything else that kind of differentiates one from two to figure out who's the best fit for me? So as I was mentioning about setting up meetings with your mentor, make it easy. I think the biggest thing is making it easy for them to want to work with you, because then, month by month or quarter by quarter, it makes it so much easier for them. So thinking about the topics that you want to talk about, so you don't just show up and they say, so what are we doing today? And you can have a few items that you think would be helpful, or maybe some activities. So my son and his mentor both love to golf. So about once a quarter, they sneak off from work and they go play a round of golf. But that's just something that they happen to have in common. And then thinking about that idea that you talked about before, Scott, about being accountable to people and following up and showing them, hey, you suggested this, I did it. I'm big on thanking people. Always thank them for their time, no matter how much time it is. And you never know, they might allow you to shadow them in their job one day too. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was this idea of peer mentoring or coaching, and it's from Marshall Goldsmith. He featured it in one of his bigger books, and then he wrote a little book that just about this feed forward concept. And I love it because it's practice for you when you're either preparing to meet with a mentor, or maybe you want to be a mentor for somebody else or for each other. And the whole idea is to just find topics that you can help each other with. So not necessarily say, hey, I saw that project and you needed to fix X, Y, and Z, but more of, hey, the next time I lead a team, what is your advice for me? What's worked for you? I find that can be a really, really helpful way. So you're sharing best practices. It's very supportive, confidential, because you never know what you're going to talk with somebody about. So it's being an objective support. So getting to that transparency that we talked about earlier, that peer mentor can have for you. So help you think through things, be accountable. So it can be anything that you want to improve. And so it's all future oriented rather than backwards looking. And I think when people do this, they find that it's just nice to have that person who they can bounce ideas off of. How did this work for you? Let's try to make this work going forward. So it's very informal. So remember earlier we talked about the formal versus the informal. This is a very informal one. Because it doesn't have to be long. It can just be, a 5-minute conversation. You run into somebody in the hallway and say, hey, what is your advice for this or this or this? And then how can you help me with this, or how can I help you? So I've found that that's kind of a fun way to learn yourself how to be a mentor before you get other mentors. So these are just a few of the questions that I came up with you could use with your somebody if you wanted to do that. So any thoughts about that, about being a peer mentor at work? Does that sound like I don't know if you all do that. Is that something that any of you do just kind of informally with other people? We do a lot of it here.
Yeah, it's probably where mentoring really starts, right? You're usually more comfortable with your peers. And so
Good
you'll
point.
ask questions and seek advice from your peers.
Yeah,
And so it is a form of mentoring going back and forth. And I would definitely also say that as you get more senior, you start looking more to your peers because there are just fewer people ahead of you on the road. And
True.
so it starts to become more peer mentorship than it does in true mentorship experience.
Yeah,
We
that's a
tend to
great
think
point.
of mentors as being more senior to the individual, but as you mentioned, reverse mentoring is very important. But I think that peer mentoring piece is something that we don't make enough use of, because in reality, we're stronger as a team than we are as individuals. So seek out that advice, seek out that counsel. And
Yeah.
you may fact that they know you better than you know yourself sometimes, and can get you to a path that you didn't even realize you were on.
Yeah, no, those are all great points. You know, we work with these people every day. They see what we do, they see our strengths, and our challenges, and yeah, it can be very, very helpful. Um, and good practice for when you are the mentor too. So yeah, anybody else have any thoughts on that? Okay, well, one of the things that I just wanted to mention, I did a session with you all engagement, I think a year or two ago. But one of the things that they found is that mentorship can lead to more engaged employees. And so, but it's kind of also that, you know, if you want to have a happy career, sometimes you do have to take charge of your own career by seeking out a mentor or seeking out a peer mentor. And so the engagement trend, it's interesting. It hasn't moved a lot. There's more unengaged employees than there are engaged employees, sadly. But I'm just curious for you all, what does it mean to be engaged at work? Like, does it feel like something?
I would say you should care about the work you're doing. You can't really be engaged if you don't care
Yeah,
about what you're doing specifically.
that's a great point. Yes.
We have some few members in the chat. We have Kelly Beard who says participate, and Nick Lay that says communication or communicate, as well as Timothy Good being productive and excellent. Excited about the
Okay.
work you do.
Yes. Yeah, that is so important. And so there's a lot of work being done to try to figure out how to do that. But I just thought this was kind of interesting and thinking about, you know, engage, like why is there 2/3 of our workforce disengaged versus 1/3 that's engaged? And so one of their most recent surveys at Gallup found that younger employees sometimes feel less connected to their culture, which I thought was kind of interesting. Um, if people work remotely, who could do their work remotely, but work at work, sometimes they feel less engaged because they're thinking, do I really, does anybody care that I'm here every day? Those kinds of things. And then, of course, people who work from home, it's very easy to get disengaged if you're not making those efforts to keep people engaged. Um, so having a mentor can improve that and help that um, to make sure that more people are feeling engaged and excited about it. Gallup also, I think I showed you this before, but I'll just remind you, I think this is kind of interesting that one of their questions, they have this thing called 12 questions or Q12 that they ask. And number 10 is I have a best friend at work. And to me, that's always so interesting because, you know, I always stop and think of all the places I've worked. Did I have a best friend at work? Like, what kept me someplace versus another? So I don't know if any of you have ever thought about that. But that's kind of an interesting way to think about being engaged at your job is, you know, really having a good friend there too. A couple of the others that really stand out are, have I received recognition for my good work? Um, my supervisor cares about me, which in all my research on trust, that is the differentiator. Everybody says that's how they know they can trust their bosses if they care about them. Um, so somebody's talked to me about my progress. So that gets to the um, concepts people are talking about with being excited and productive and those kinds of things. And also opportunities to learn and grow. So that's kind of interesting way to look at it. So I was looking at that and comparing it to a survey on what drives employees, so that recognition is right up there. Making sure my work is aligned with the organization, and making sure that I'm getting training that actually is related to what I'm doing. So is there anything else you would add to that? Or do you think those are true, more true, less true about what drives us?
Can you go back to the previous slide, Dr. Mishra?
Yeah, yes.
Because I was looking at that question 12, right? I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. And
Yeah.
you talked earlier about engagement, and the real motivator of engagement is proactivity. So yes, the opportunities are there. Are you doing anything with the opportunities? Because that's going to drive up your engagement. And so it's interesting that they talk about having opportunities versus taking advantage of an opportunity or leveraging an opportunity. Because one is just, well, yeah, it's there.
That's a really great point, because I think it's very easy to sometimes see that there's a lot there, but do we actually take the initiative, have the time, are we focused on that? That's a great point. Yeah, and I think that kind of gets to that idea of the mentor offering those opportunities or directing us, and then seeing, are we taking advantage of them, or are we just like, oh, that's nice, it's there, but I'm too busy. Or so yeah, that's a great point. Should we call Gallup and tell them they need to redo their survey?
Even Gallup needs feedback.
They definitely do. Yes. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about the questions or these outcomes here? Are they missing anything? I think it's interesting that recognition is high on the list, because I don't think a lot of us think about that, but I don't know if any of you are into the Love Languages by Reverend Chapman, but words of affirmation is definitely would go right there with that. And to me, that's kind of one of those hard ones to say, yep, this is what motivates me. I need this. But I think it is also helpful for, to share that with employers, so that they know, hey, this would really help me. I don't know that we always do that, but. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, I've been doing research on trust for a long time. And so I call these 4 different parts of trust, because my late husband and I really wanted to get to, like, we sometimes say we trust people, but do we really? Like, what does it mean? And so we found 4 different ways that people trust other people. If they're reliable, show up, pay attention, are accessible. If they're open and honest, getting to that transparency thing we talked about earlier. If they're competent, can they actually do their job? Or are they willing to learn and improve? And then compassionate or concern is really the last way, but it's actually can be the most impactful, because whenever we do surveys of who's the best boss you ever had, tell us about this person, it always comes back to they cared about me. Me as an employee, me as a person, how I could excel in my career, and those kinds of things. So if you have feedback to improve that, I'm always open to that. We call it the rock of trust. But I'm always trying to improve that. So anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. So now that we've gone over all of these different concepts about mentoring, and this is where I was saying there's sometimes some overlap between the mentoring and coaching, because one of the other things that I found in my research, and I know Gallup has too, is that we really appreciate managers who don't just boss us around, but who coach us and help us to become better at whatever it is we're doing. I did a whole study of an entire Starbucks in Chapel Hill, because they were way too happy. These people were just like, it's 7 a.m. I'm on my way to grad school, and these people are so excited. I'm like, was it too much caffeine, or what is with you people? And so I ended up interviewing the whole store. And what they really told me was that their boss, who was only a few years older than them, but that she was so good at every single day saying, hey, you did a great job here. Have you thought about this? Maybe this would help you. And so, I mean, and they all were in complete agreement. I interviewed them all separately, and they all said the same thing, that they really appreciated having a manager who was willing to not just wait once a year and give them an annual review saying, you did this well, you should work on this, but every single day giving that continuous feedback. So, what do you all think about this idea? Is there time in our jobs to do this? Is it easy to do?
It's probably one of the key struggles in any organization is the difference between managing and leading. And so often we put individuals into management roles when in reality what they're doing is actually managing tasks. They're getting stuff done when the
Right.
majority of the time should be spent on developing their people. And
Yeah.
so often though, we just, the things that we do, the checklist of items as that, hey, we're adding, we're doing all the things that we need to do to be a good employee and or be a good manager. When in reality, if you're a manager and haven't developed the people on your team, you've failed as a manager because you failed as a leader.
Yeah, no, that's a really great insight. There are some organizations who I know who are now rewarding people for developing the people under them, which I think is really interesting because I had a really great boss at General Motors, and I don't know if everybody appreciated how much he really poured into all of us in that way. Yeah. But yeah, thank you for that distinction between tasks and people too. Anybody else? What do you think? Do you think it's easier to become one if you've been coached or mentored yourself?
I would say yes, because that previous coach slash mentor that mentored you kind of laid the steps out for you to then follow that path to then kind of pay it forward. I would say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that reminder, Jay. I'm going to go send him an email today and thank him because I didn't actually think about it from that perspective that he was so developmental and so positive that then you just kind of go, oh, I love this. I want to do this for other people too. So yeah, I'm going to write him a note today and say thank you. So thank you. Yeah, we actually interviewed him for our most recent book because we just loved that he was such a great boss. And my husband and I both actually happened to work for him. So, which was kind of unusual, but he was a great boss. So I want to open it up to questions. If you have any questions about anything at this point, after talking about all these concepts.
And Dr. Mishra, before my colleagues vote me off the island here with all these comments, got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
In Lori Creever's book, did she talk about the frequency of mentorship? Should you get it once a week, once a month? Did she give any feeling around the frequency of the interaction between mentee and mentor?
Yeah, that's where she was saying to kind of look at that person's accessibility to understand what it would mean for you to be meaningful. So, for instance, if you say, "Oh, I want to be mentored by the CEO," you have to know you're not going to get that person's attention very much. So, if you're okay with that, so she was saying that really kind of depends on what you're looking for. So that's why if you really are at a stage in your career where you would like some more constant feedback, maybe don't start with the CEO, start with somebody who's a little bit more accessible and has that time for you, whether it's once a week or, once a month or once a quarter, whatever feels comfortable to you at that point in your career. So it's more based on what you need and to find that right person. Does that make sense?
And then in the presentation, your entire this morning, but there's being coachable, being a good mentee, but then you've got to have an effective mentor, right?
Yes.
And there may not be an effective match between you and the mentor. The mentor may be very, very knowledgeable, may have lots of experience, but they can't articulate in a way meaningful to you. There just isn't a connection between the two. And so be very, very aware of that match between mentee and mentor. Same thing happens in coaching. And then as we mentioned towards the end about developing people, look for mentors who John Maxwell says a level 4 leader means they have a history of developing people.
Right.
Go to the people who have a passion for developing others. And that means offering guidance, offering advice, offering support. Those are the people who usually make the best mentors.
Yeah, great points, because there are a lot of people who you might write down on your list going, oh, here's my list, but maybe one of them is that's not really their thing. And if you're going to spend that time, much better to spend time with who's more developmental. Yeah, great point.
It's the old, the best player doesn't make the best coach, right? They could be extremely talented, but unfortunately, they're not good in a mentoring role.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you. Anybody else?
I have a slightly strange question.
Okay.
So in approaching someone, would you recommend actually using the label mentor? So it's, not long ago, somebody asked me, will you be my mentor? And I was like, ooh, that's, it just seemed like more of a commitment than, can I call you once in a while and, and bounce some ideas off of you? So what do you think about the label?
That's true. I think as organizations formalize mentoring more, people might be more comfortable with that label. But to your point, that is true, because sometimes somebody might go, oh my, this is overwhelming. Am I going to meet with you every week? Am I responsible for your career? I think you don't necessarily have to use the word mentor. You could just say, hey, Dr. Favara, could I meet with you once a month and just share some ideas with you? But I think a lot more people are used to that idea in organizations of, hey, mentoring really helps. And so using that term. So it might depend on the person. And if somebody asks you, they might say, okay, maybe we'll reframe it if that doesn't feel comfortable. But I think it's okay to use the mentor word, because I think people expect that they're going to be asked at some point.
To kind of piggyback off what Dr. Farrar just said, I had a friend reach out and call me just to ask questions about just advice, I guess, for what his next career move should be. And it wasn't really like I was mentoring him or anything. It was just more like bouncing off ideas and just kind of having a conversation as far as what would be the best path forward for him. And I kind of do resonate with what Dr. Farrar was saying as far as like the weight of this term mentor, whereas it was just more of like, how can I help you in a way, like just informally almost.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And maybe there was the distinction because it was somebody who's a colleague. So somebody who's maybe more at your level, then it might feel more like that peer mentoring, peer coaching type of a thing where we're helping each other out. But yeah, depending on what it is. And that's why, when I'm in that position, I always tell people now, I'll give you some perspective, but make sure you go get perspective from other people too. So they don't feel like, oh my goodness, this person said this, I must do this. Well, we all have different experiences that we bring to the table. So sometimes it's good to get a couple perspectives. But
Dr. Fabar, there's a new term that's starting to become more popular when it comes around mentoring, and that's the term guide. It's being popularized really through Donald Miller and his work on story brand and being the guide to the hero. So obviously the mentee is the hero of the story and the mentor is the guide. And that guide is a little less, I guess, weighty than mentor. If you're someone says, hey, can you guide me? And you're kind of like, all right, I'll give you a direction here or there, go left, go right, versus thinking you're going to have to invest a lot of time. So that's a term that's starting to gain a little bit of traction, is guide.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Interesting. There's a little mysticism with it.
That's true. but maybe a little less pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Well, I
right.
know we've got to wrap up, so if I've left my email there, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, somebody stole Karen Mishra, so I had to do Dr. Karen just to differentiate from this person in the UK, but please reach out if you have any more questions.
All right. That should do it for May's Leadership Live. Thank you again, Dr. Mishra, for joining us once again. It's always a pleasure hearing your insights and wisdom on our Leadership Live. So, yeah, thanks again for joining in May, and we'll see you next month in June as we finish out our Q2 theme with a presentation on fostering accountability. So we will see you next month. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.